Welcome to How to Yugioh.
Let's explain ratio of hand traps. Okay, so I want to say this is going to be my last video of 2024, as after this I will be going for a Christmas break and we'll be seeing you next time on 2025 next year. So all I've got to say is Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video. Let's talk about the coming issue that happens with new players as they want to learn Yu-Gi-Oh and have no clue about Yu-Gi-Oh, what I like to call the new player trap. If you're a newcomer or someone who's come to Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm sure you've seen a lot of YouTube channels that talk about Yu-Gi-Oh that tell you to just add hand traps into your deck. While this, I would say, is not very good advice, not only does it misrepresent what Yu-Gi-Oh is, but those videos are perfectly designed for people who are playing Yu-Gi-Oh at this current point in time and are experts or have vast amounts of knowledge about Yu-Gi-Oh. As a new player, you finding videos about hand traps and being told to just put hand traps into your deck and everything is going to be fine is an absolute fallacy. And the fact that there's nothing out there on YouTube or anywhere else where you can actually learn Yu-Gi-Oh is a crime and a sin. So I will say this, for anyone who wants to learn Yu-Gi-Oh or who is willing to learn the game, do not look up any guides if you're new to the game or returning to the game about hand traps, as it doesn't teach you the fundamental things about Yu-Gi-Oh. Just because you put hand traps into your deck doesn't mean you will win games, right? There's a fundamental information that you're missing here, and it is vital if you want to learn Yu-Gi-Oh that you follow the appropriate steps to learn the game properly. For example, most of the common questions as a new player you're going to have is, can I learn how to speed read? Because Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of text. Can I get information about how to read a card quickly and effectively so that I can retain that information quickly? How about the explanation of interaction, of common interactions in Yu-Gi-Oh? Can that be explained to me? Can it be explained to me the aspects of, not just card interactions, but spell interactions, monster interactions, and all kinds of other interactions that are in the game. These are the basic things that you won't get the answers to. With the guides or whatever that are told to you about hand traps and just putting in all the hand traps, you will be told to put hand traps into your deck and have as many as possible, but what no one will tell you is the correct ratio of hand traps. And if you are told the correct ratio of hand traps, again, this is with the knowledge that you as a player already have been playing the game for a long period of time and have this so-called knowledge. Again, these videos that talk about hand traps and putting in a lot of hand traps into your deck assume that the person watching them already plays the game to a very high level. And this is the problem. Assuming someone knows Yu-Gi-Oh to a high enough level and you don't give them any context on the hand traps is a problem. Which is why I would say do not fall for the trap of hand traps and looking at videos that talk about hand traps. You need context. Unless you've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for a long period of time and you know Yu-Gi-Oh intimately and you would call yourself an expert Yu-Gi-Oh player, as a new player or a returning player, do not, I repeat, do not look up videos about hand traps. Context is everything. Now, another thing I want to mention is the 6 to 9 hand traps. Personally, as your Yu-Gi-Oh sensei, as I talk here, one thing I'd like to take note is I do feel when it comes to hand traps, 6 to 9 is not the ideal amount, but the correct amount. When you start having hand traps that are above, that are 12, 15, 20 or more hand traps into your deck, breaking is going to be inevitable. Another thing is that unless your deck is a one-card combo, which is few and far between in Yu-Gi-Oh, Yes, I know what you're going to say now, that this year we've had loads, every single deck is a one card combo, which is not necessarily true. But facts have proven that having more than 9 hand traps into your deck means that your likelihood of breaking on those in your hand is highly unlikely. And you must remember as well that when you have 12 to 15 to 20 hand traps into your deck, that you are not playing your deck anymore, you are simply just playing a deck that's full of hand traps. The other aspect as well is why I say 6 to 9 is the ideal, is because that is the ideal number of hand traps that you can have in your deck, and your deck isn't going to fall apart, or you're not going to be able to just break on the hand traps. While hand traps, indeed, as you're going to have been told, majority of pro players or any Yugi tubers will tell you that putting in a lot of hand traps are good. Again, context is king. Without any context and without you realizing what hand traps that you need, especially if you're a returning player or a new player, the ability to just know the range of hand traps that you need is simply impossible. Again, this is false advertising, and this doesn't fail to teach you about what hand traps you need. And if you do need hand traps, which are the ones that are the most common? And there's so many questions when it comes to hand traps, so much intricacies, so much nuance is required, and so much knowledge is needed for you as a player to know the correct amount of hand traps. Sure, someone could tell you, someone could demonstrate to you, and someone could just tell you, put in a lot of hand traps in there. But without context, without realizing the game itself and Yu-Gi-Oh! And underestimating what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, sure, it's a children's card game, but just flat out taking for granted that hand traps exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! And just thinking that with a naivete that you can just put a lot of hand traps into your deck and everything is going to be fine is very haphazard thinking, and should not be the thinking that one should have, especially when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! And that is why I say 6 to 9 hand traps is the best ratio for hand traps in a deck. This means 9 being the max. This means, right, that whatever deck you're playing, even if you do break, right, with the hand traps, it's going to be just enough so that you are able to play your deck, right? Just enough, just about enough. When you go over 9 hand traps in a deck, unless that deck is a 1-card combo deck, or unless you are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! To the point that you would call yourself an expert in Yu-Gi-Oh!, then it is highly ill-advised for you as a player to be playing more than 9 hand traps in your archetype. If you do not have intimate knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! And do not understand the game at a high level, then playing more than 9 hand traps is ill-advised, and I would say is not wise for you as a player to do so. Okay? It is very, very wrong. And a lot of times, a lot of new players, a lot of returning players enter this trap when they're playing the game physically, right? Maybe there's a master duel, we can say, there in the TCG, but I would say this is the biggest trap that players fall into, is that they're told by Yugi tubers, by everyone online, by their friends or their mates, just chuck in a lot of hand traps. There's no context given, there's nothing told, you're just told, put 12, 15 hand traps into your deck. It is, and I'm telling you now, as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Sensei, that is not advised. It is not good for you to put hand traps into your deck just for the sake of putting hand traps into your deck. Don't do it. Let's move on. Okay, and so we will talk about hand trap misuse. But how does hand trap misuse come into being or come into place? What do I mean by this? Well, this goes over to the topic that I was talking before about putting in a lot of hand traps into your deck. When you are told, as especially if you're a newcomer or returning player into Yu-Gi-Oh!, just chuck in a lot of hand traps into your deck. Put 20 hand traps in there. First of all, as a newcomer, misusing hand traps is a common sin and is something that you're going to be doing very often if you look up videos that talk about hand traps. Again, you as a newcomer or a returning player has no context how these hand traps are used. Sure, the videos can explain to you about, use these hand traps in this situation. But without first-hand knowledge, without the experience yourself as a player, and without the nuance, right, you will have no clue how to use these hand traps appropriately. And more than likely, you playing 20 or 12 or 15 hand traps is going to result in a lot of hand trap misuse. Right? It is a very common thing, and is something I think is not talked about in Yu-Gi-Oh! Far enough. I think many a time, lots of Yu-Gi-Tubers talk about just slapping in a lot of hand traps into your deck, doing the numbers, doing the probability right, and saying that, you'll 15 hand traps is fantastic as you can stop your opponent. It's all about saying no. It's all about negation. You can therefore see why I hate hand traps as a whole, especially because they are misused, they are mismanaged, and you're not using them correctly. One of the reasons why I do not like negation so much is because negation, right, brings about laziness, and laziness brings about improper way of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And underestimating this game for what it is. Just because, I repeat this again, just because you put a lot of hand traps into your deck doesn't mean you can win every single game. Hand traps do not make Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is much more than just hand traps. And you having that naive thinking that just having hand traps into your deck will mean you automatically win the game is naive. This is the sort of thinking that players will have, especially when they're new or returning to the game, as they've looked at and summarized what a lot of pro players, a lot of Yu-Gi-Tubers are saying. Most Yu-Gi-Tubers basically emphasize that put in a lot of hand traps. Put hand traps in there, just put them in, don't care, it's gonna stop your opponent, it doesn't matter. As long as you stop your opponent, you'll win the game. But fail to realize that there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of, again, those videos are only useful if you have high-level knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! And you understand Yu-Gi-Oh! To an intimate and high level. If you do not, as a newcomer, as a returning player, do not, I emphasize this enough, put a lot of hand traps into your deck. In fact, I would say leave hand traps out of it. Understand Yu-Gi-Oh! In an intimate way. Understand it, breathe it, live it. The moment you understand Yu-Gi-Oh! To a fundamental level, then I would say, if you're a newcomer or returning player, add hand traps into your deck. If you have no context of hand traps at all, do not use hand traps. Avoid them if necessary, especially if you are a newcomer or returning player. Let's move on to the next point. Now, I'll talk about the other thing that comes about when you're a newcomer or a returning player for Yu-Gi-Oh! Lack of useful knowledge. Again, these videos that you see on YouTube that talk about hand traps or things like that, if you're a newcomer or a returning player, they lack useful Yu-Gi-Oh! Knowledge and practical Yu-Gi-Oh! Knowledge that you will need. For example, as a newcomer, the questions that you're going to be asking are speed reading. One of the things that you're going to wonder is, how do I read Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards quickly and effectively and retain that information in a quick and simple way? This is something that I'm sure you have realized no one talks about in Yu-Gi-Oh! I do in fact, and you can find it in the tips and tricks playlist. Shameless plug there, I know. But that's beside the point. The point is, except for me, your Yu-Gi-Oh! Sensei here, that talks about, speed reading, no one on this godforsaken website talks about speed reading. No one here will talk about the thing as a newcomer that you need is the practical knowledge, like, for example, card interactions. Simple card interactions like targeting. Like what happens just for the simple fact, face up and face down. The interaction of face up cards and face down cards. A card when it is face up and a card that is face down. One of the most basic Yu-Gi-Oh! Knowledge items that you need to know is not even told to you. The knowledge of face-up cards and face-down cards can deal you such wonders, especially if you're a newcomer. It can teach you a whole new avenue of Yu-Gi-Oh! And open to you doors and ways of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That you never thought before, and can answer a lot of questions that would be left unanswered. For example, just the simple interaction of the opponent activates Effective Healer and you activate Book of Moon, placing your monster face down, means that they can no longer target your monster as it doesn't exist, as when cards are face down, they do not exist. Just that knowledge alone of face down cards can give you a whole new avenue of thinking, as I've just explained right there. Another aspect as well is keywords. A lot of times, when you look at these hand trap videos that talk about hand traps, you will find most Yu-Gi-Oh players use a lot of keywords when they talk about certain things in Yu-Gi-Oh. You as a returning player or a new player will not know what these words are. And when they mention certain words, you're going to be completely confused. And I know a big trap that these pro players usually say is that Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have any keywords, that Yu-Gi-Oh is completely and utterly difficult and is just a game for the dogs. And I will say absolute bullcrap. That is not true. Again, on my channel in Tips and Tricks, I talk about in that playlist with keywords that are mentioned in Yu-Gi-Oh. This is the sort of knowledge you as a newcomer, you as a returning player need to know. Keywords. Face up and face down cards, card interactions, hand trap interactions, interacting with your opponent, things like that. The sort of basics of the basic things that you need to know in Yu-Gi-Oh! Lack of useful Yu-Gi-Oh! Knowledge in hand trap videos that you see is severely lacking and is something you as a returning player or a new player need to know. And that is why I do not really emphasize or really like hand trap videos in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not to say that they don't have their place, they do. But if you're a returning player or a new player, those are videos that will not help you unless you have high or intimate knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! That's all I've got to say. Let's head on to the conclusion. And so, I'm going to be here concluding this video. So what have I got to say here? Well, when it comes to the ratio of hand traps that you should have as your Yu-Gi-Oh! Sensei, I would say 6 to 9 is the perfect number, the perfect ratio. As when you have that level of hand traps going to 6 or either 9, it's not too much that your archetype or whatever deck you're playing cannot play. But it's not too little that you cannot interrupt your opponent, especially if you're new to the game or if you are a returning player. The problem is that if you start adding 12, 15, or 20 hand traps into your deck and you don't understand your archetype well enough or the deck that you're playing, then you're more likely to make mistakes, you're more likely to not understand nuance, and you're more likely to just do things that you're not supposed to do. Remember, when you are playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially if you're a newcomer or you're a returning player, there are certain aspects of knowledge that you need to learn. First things first, you need to understand how to speed read. You need to learn how to speed read and how to retain information quickly and efficiently. This is a skill that you're going to have to master and learn. And if you do not have this knowledge, or if no one has told you about this, then that is a problem. Again, you're going to have to also discover about keywords in Yu-Gi-Oh! Trust me, they do exist, and anyone that tells you that keywords don't exist is lying to you and doesn't know Yu-Gi-Oh! Well enough. You can find all the information that I'm talking about on my playlist on Tips and Tricks. Another thing you're going to need to realize is something known as activation condition. That cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have activation conditions, and that if an activation condition cannot be met, then it cannot activate. This simple knowledge of activation condition and understanding what activation condition is another aspect that you need to learn and realize. These are 3 facets of basic information you, as a returning or new player, need to learn and master. And if you do not have this knowledge, you're going to have a serious disadvantage. This is not even getting to the fact that you need to know the types of effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, that again is rarely told to you, or if ever is not told to you at all. You need to also know about just cards in general, know that the color coding, know that blue is ritual, white is synchro, black is XYZ. Again, there's so much basic knowledge that you need in Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you're not told this or you do not learn this, it's going to be a serious problem and you're going to be in a serious disadvantage. So overall, what I want to say in this conclusion, although it's gone a bit long and is getting long-winded, the point that I want to make here is that when it comes to hand traps, it is important that you need to have subsequent knowledge, high-level knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! I would say personally, really, to understand those videos well enough and to use that information quickly and effectively. You at least need to, at bare minimum, know how to speed read in Yu-Gi-Oh! Speed reading is one of the most important and fundamental skills that you're going to need when you play Yu-Gi-Oh! And is something that if you do not know in Yu-Gi-Oh!, then you're going to have a severe issue and a severe problem. This is a skill which you will have to learn. That is it. And with that, we'll come to the end of this video. Well, tune in next time, and I think I'll see you guys next year. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.